Welcome, everyone, to the Leading Together podcast, Insights for Delaware's Tomorrow. In each episode, we sit down with the top minds and leaders from Delaware and across the United States who share their perspectives in ways that help advance First Aid Educate's mission, which is to build capacity, raise awareness, and really elevate school board leadership across our communities. I'm your host, Julia Keleher, Executive Director of First Aid Educate. Thank you for joining us. Today, I have a fantastic guest for our listeners, someone who's extremely well known nationally and in probably every Delaware circle. Paul Herdman is joining us today. He's a longtime education policy leader here in Delaware, but literally his experience spans the globe. Currently, he serves as the president and CEO of Rodel, where he's led the work for more than 2 decades, focused on strengthening Delaware's public education system and its connection to the state's economy. In my opinion, Paul brings a really unique and valuable perspective because it's informed not only by his experience, but the extensive leadership roles that he's played in Delaware and nationally. Because not only has he brought his own perspective to the conversation, but he's worked with hundreds of well-known and respected leaders in government, academia, and the private sector. He's been deeply involved in international education policy work, and he's playing a central role in building a long-standing cross-sector partnerships in Delaware. So he's going to tell us about all of this and more. And I'm going to jump right in. Paul, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks, Julia.
Yep.
It's great to just even have this platform, and First Aid Educate has sort of played a unique role in sort of filling a void. So I'm excited to play a role. Thank you.
Fantastic. Me too. I'm excited. So you've been leading Rodel for a long time, and I think there's you have one of the few people that have this ability to see sort of longitudinally, right? Like how we've gotten here. You've been central in Delaware's education landscape. So let's kind of ground the listeners in that work. Let's talk about Rodel and the role that it's played.
Sure. So it might be helpful just, in terms of my background, I come at this from a teacher perspective. So that's where I started, working with special needs students, then traditional students across multiple states. I worked for a couple of governors. And this has been a unique role. This organization is somewhat unique in the sense that it has its roots in the private sector, but really is playing a role in trying to move the public sector in sort of this hybrid way. So maybe just a second or two on sort of our history, because I think it informs kind of where we go from here.
Sure.
So, you're a Delawarean. You know that DuPont has sort of been the hub of the economic center here for many, many decades, hundreds of years. And Rodel was really started by a guy named Bill Buttinger, who had an idea that nobody thought was going to work. It was a roller developed in Delaware for printing initially. And it was an idea that really took off and then spun into these various technologies around surface, technologies around kind of working with computer chips, et cetera. Became a global company over 30 years. And it was really based on sort of an innovation sort of DNA of really going the direction that other folks are not going. The founders, Bill Buttinger, used to talk about how their company was built on a disdain for the norm. And when the crowd was going left, they would go right. And they wanted to bring that to education, because in their global work, they realized that the U.S. had some work to do to maintain its status globally. And so put some money in the Delaware Community Foundation with a pretty broad mission. Initially, they weren't sure whether they wanted to invest in healthcare, the environment, et cetera, but they invested in education with the thought that if we do a good job in education, it can improve everything else. And so our tagline is a great education changes everything. And so that is our foundation. It's built on innovation and public-private partnership. And what we do today is what we say is we convene, connect, and scale transformational change. The work takes different forms based on the political context, but we work in 5 broad areas. We work on early childhood education, changing our funding system, modernizing it. We work on building literacy in partnership with many players around the state. We're looking to help diversify and strengthen the teaching force. And we're working on helping make a better connection between what high school kids do after they leave high school in terms of college and career. So those are our 5 big areas. And, we're in the midst of doing this work. It's evolved over time, but despite some challenging headwaters, I actually feel very excited about where we are as a state. So we can get into that, but those are a few points about just kind of where we came from and what we do today.
Yeah, no, it's super helpful, and I actually didn't have all of that. So this, I will say, disdain for the norm. I'll subscribe to that. I think that's
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
a worthy way to look at things.
yeah,
But also, so you laid out the different areas, and they each as a body of work, whether it's diversity in the workforce or post graduation, where does a child go, early education,
yeah,
they're distinct, right? But they kind of support each other. They sort of go together in a way. It seems almost like a continuum, right? The
yeah,
whole life cycle there of yeah.
yeah. No, the work is definitely, built on a continuum, starting early, creating the resources necessary to help all students, working all the way through that transition to who helps folks actually move forward in their education, but then how do you actually build this public-private partnership to help young people launch in successful ways? So it is a continuum, and it's actually very much interconnected with a lot of other issues.
Mm-hmm.
But within that education space, we definitely look at it as an interconnected continuum.
Yeah, and I think that's smart because, I'd love to hear what your perspective is on this, but sometimes fatigue sets in when people are bombarded with a lot of different things to address. But what you've done nicely is to package it. You say, no, we're sort of fixing the student's trajectory, right? This is one thing. It just happens to move through these phases. And then you create the opportunity to kind of be mutually reinforcing. The thing you did in early childhood then benefits for literacy, right? Like there's a connection there. So you get sort of a synergistic effect, seemingly.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think a lot of what we try to do is shift folks' mindset from a particular issue being a condition, like
Mhm.
this is the way it is, to a challenge. Like, what can we do
Mm.
about it?
Mhm.
And those pieces all are interconnected. I mean, I've actually worked with some international folks, as you mentioned. There's a group called the OECD. It's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's does international research and policy development. And they said, this one leader there that we've worked with quite a bit said that they could look at countries' investments in early childhood education and predict their literacy scores over the next 5 years. So there was a direct correlation.
Mhm.
So what we see is that it is all interconnected. So like in the
Mhm.
investments, the other thing that is done internationally that we're getting to is when kids need more support, they get more support, in terms of resources. And that means financial, but also educational support. If you don't have that, and then you don't have great teachers, the biggest factor in
Right.
school, then you can't necessarily build on the investment. So
Mhm.
it is all interconnected.
It's smart too. The design is really smart. And another piece of this, is leading a coalition, right? There you've got
Yeah,
it's a public-private partnership. You have a lot of people who are behind your work. What's
yeah,
that like to sort of, everybody's looking at the same issue from a different perspective, and yet you've been
yeah,
able to create these leading documents. And I think now maybe you could talk a little about C 2035 and, that sort of
sure.
thought leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things you've been, involved in education for a long time yourself, and you realize that a lot of entities have veto power, right? So an amazing teacher can be quashed by an uninspired principal. A great principal can be thwarted by, a disinterested superintendent or school board that's not aligned, all the way up through the Department of Ed and the legislature. And so with that knowledge, one of the things that we realized is that nobody can roll anybody else. You need to actually be aligned to get anything significant done. Otherwise you can complain within your little sphere, push on it, but it won't amount to significant scalable change. And so in terms of what we've done in terms of a coalition, we've done a couple of things. One is we've aligned on a definition of leadership that is that a strong leader is willing to disappoint his own constituency at a rate that they can stand. Meaning that if you are a business leader, you might need to recognize that we need to invest more, pay more in taxes in order to get the investments we need in early childhood. If you are a union leader, you might need to recognize that there's some collective accountability that we all need to take in order to advance the system. And related to that, in building this coalition, we settled on what we call an 85% rule. In that this is a vision coalition established in 2005, one of the longest standing in the country. And what we said was that this is just going to be a coalition of the willing. So we have union representation, we have business representation, we have the Secretary of Ed, we have district leaders, community leaders, et cetera. And this coalition of the willing is held together by this 85% rule, meaning that if you and I are on this coalition, if we don't agree with at least 85% of what's in our collective charge, then we should walk away. And when we enter this coalition, sure, we represent a different constituency, but we are saying that we're going to try and represent the state in terms of how to move the state forward. And it's worked pretty well. You referenced this document called C-2035, and it's a 10-year plan that we just released last year. It stands for Student Equity and Excellence in 2035. And we've done this now for the third time. And some folks have kind of joked like, what is it? Vision 2015, Student Success 2025. Can't they kind of figure it out? We learned this through a couple of lessons. One is when we went to visit the Finlands and the Singapores, et cetera, they all had 10-year plans because the main thing that we realized is that most of the big things we want to change are going to take more than one political cycle to change. So you can't necessarily have a 2-year plan or a 3-year plan, even a 5-year plan. If you're going to change early childhood education or change the funding system, it's going to take more than one political cycle to change it. So having that 10-year vision enables folks across the political spectrum to align on sort of a horizon line that can galvanize people towards collective action.
Yeah. This 10-year notion is I think it's an important one. Somebody said, I was having a conversation this morning and it also came up. Meaningful and lasting change doesn't happen overnight. You can get a small win, but then it's gone. The tide changes or the wind blows in a different direction and kind of it doesn't have enough sort of staying power. But when you build it intentionally, and much like you were describing the sort of the interrelated nature of the portfolio of work, you're inching it along, but really that's what makes the lasting change, because it's like tectonic plates that are shifting. It doesn't happen overnight, but when you move it, even if you've moved it only a degree, when you roll that out, it's really meaningful change on the longer term. Yeah.
To the point earlier around the veto power of all the different constituencies, you can get a short-term win, maybe get legislation passed and feel very excited about that. But if you don't do the legwork on the front end of working with folks in the districts, on the school boards, in classrooms, they will kill it in implementation, right? So you can have this wonderful idea about whatever it might be, an approach to improving literacy, can look great on paper, but if folks on the ground aren't actually doing it, they can quietly kill it. So all that investment in time on the front end won't yield long-term impact.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's interesting. I want to go back to what you mentioned because I did want to ask about your international work and sort of what you've seen,
Sure.
what you've learned. This these investments and the 10-year plans that other countries have had, but also sort of what you're seeing now in terms of preparing students for life after high school. How does that look in the international scene?
So it's been interesting. So a lot of governors in the U.S. Have focused in on places like Switzerland, Germany, and looking at their apprenticeship model.
Hmm.
Um, and there are a couple of things that I think it's helpful to understand in terms of like how the landscape has changed. So when you and I were going through high school, entering into whatever we're going to do next, maybe some college, maybe some work immediately, we weren't dealing with a lot of the same things that young people are dealing with today. So we know about the impact of COVID and sort of the post-pandemic experience, but AI is obviously changing the landscape. Folks have framed it as sort of the fourth industrial revolution, meaning that we have now this mix of biology and digital science sort of mixing together at a pace that back when you and I maybe were in high school going into college, shifts were happening in years. Now it's
Hmm.
happening in weeks or months,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so young people have to address like, how do I jump on this fast moving train? I've got 3 kids who are in their
Yeah.
20s trying to wrestle with that. But one of the macro things that we picked up looking internationally is that there was a study by OECD that looked at 10 countries over 10 years. And one thing that I found interesting was that they said that young people today are more educated but less experienced than their older peers. And the result of that is that they are often 3 to 4 times less likely to be employed than their older peers. And so the anecdote for that lack of like real experience is
Hmm.
engaging in life outside of the classroom. And that's one of the big things when I got a chance to visit 4 other countries outside the US. I went to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Scotland. And there are a handful of things that we think are really important in terms of the work here. Um, I'd say one thing is that the work of preparing for college and career has to happen for everybody. We often have had this bifurcated system where
Hmm.
some young people were getting career experience, like your vocational students. Um, we had students that were on more of the college track were getting better advising. And the reality is that we need this kind of blending of the head and the hand
Mm.
across for all students. Um, I'd say there are just a few more kind of high level things that I think we're shooting for here in Delaware, and I think are kind of moving nationally that based on some
Hmm.
of this international work. One is that the goal line used to be just getting a high school degree. So a high school principal would think, you know, I'm excited about kids walking across the high school stage, getting their
Hmm.
diploma. And the reality now is that the goal line is more like economic mobility, like actually getting to a place where
Hmm.
um, uh, they have the educational experience and the work experience, the real life experience to be ready for what they need to do next.
Hmm.
Because one of the things that we picked up, I sit on the workforce development board, and we talked to 250 Delaware employers. And one of the main things they said is that we can teach them the technical skills, but they don't have the durable skills of how to communicate, work together,
Hmm.
et cetera. And I think the only way you can do that is getting out in the real world.
Sure.
And so I'd say that's another big thing that we're seeing. And some people call it the big blur, which is that high school is going to be blurring with the college experience. We're already seeing that with dual enrollment, and it's
Hmm.
also blurring with apprenticeships and work-based experiences. Um, my sense is that there's going to be some more formal work in that space. But actually, in Delaware, the governor signed Executive Order 10, which
Hmm.
created a new office that actually connects higher ed, K-12, and workforce. So we're starting to see that blending. So it's, all kids need work and college type experience to be ready. We need to think about how to blur that experience, between college, high school, and the workplace. And we need to kind of think about the goal line not being just high school degrees, because 80% of the jobs are going to require some education beyond high school. It could be apprenticeship, it could be some kind of degree program. But by 2030, 80% of the jobs are going to require some level of education beyond high school. And we're closer to 60% in Delaware.
That's fascinating. I mean, a lot of this stuff I had no idea, although I would say that inherently, I think that education, at least in my own experience, my personal experience was, it was a means to an end. And so I had more mobility in my life, and I didn't wind up moving around the corner in South Philadelphia because I was able to get an education,
Yeah.
so that rings true. But I'm glad to hear that it's kind of the high school diploma in service of some further fulfillment, right? It's not the end of the line. It's really just a milestone marker.
Yeah. I mean, and we've gotten away from the high school degree really meaning a lot, to be candid. It used to be that there were, if you lived in New York, you had the Regents exams, you had sort of these exit exams that the market, whether it's whether it's employers or colleges, had some clear indication of what a high school degree meant. But there's been pushback on testing, which I understand, but it's sort of watered down. What does it mean to actually have a high school degree? And frankly, I think that's why you've seen, actually in this country more so than any of the countries I went to visit, dual enrollment, because people have confidence in what a college credit looks like. And so you see it. We actually in Delaware have the fastest rate of dual enrollment growth in the country. And we're seeing that not only in college courses, but we're now seeing it in apprenticeship degrees while still in high school. So our average age of kids with apprenticeships is, one of the lowest in the country also. So there's a movement in that direction, but the high school degree has been kind of watered down over time. So it's natural that there's been replacements.
So all these things you're talking about, that's it's like it's really, it's like shifting sand underneath, everything seems to be changing. So that brings me to another topic I wanted to ask about. How does someone lead in this kind of environment, right? What is a leader, an person who wants, to see this work? What do they have to show up with? Right? What's the leadership disposition?
Yeah, I think that's, I think about it particularly for, your primary audience around school boards. I'd say one of the things that we've been fairly successful with in terms of this vision coalition work is leading with data and trying to get a common understanding of what the actual challenge is. And, each of us has gone through schooling in some form or another and has a clear opinion about what it should look like. But if we can ground ourselves in validated third-party data of here's the issue as it relates to literacy over time by demographic subgroup, kids of color, low income, et cetera, special needs, then really start to unpack what are sort of the underlying conditions that might be informing that. I think a willingness to put the time in and the energy to actually invest in looking at the data is a start, and being somewhat open-minded to continue to push on that. And to the point earlier, I think everybody comes to a leadership position with a history and a point of view. But if you want to move a collective effort forward, to that definition earlier about being willing to disappoint your own constituency at a rate that they can stand, being willing to say, maybe they're right. Maybe the person that I've been vehemently arguing with over the last several months, maybe they're right. And really try and put your head in their space. And
Mm-hmm.
we often do that. Actually, Bill Budinger, the founder of Rodel, started his first factory right off of 95 on the 896 exit. There's a big factory that's still there.
Mm-hmm.
It's now a DuPont factory again. But he said he had his researchers complaining that the marketing team didn't know what they were doing, and they were kind of messing up their timing and process. And so they literally, he had them switch jobs for a week. And they ended up stop fighting and realized
Mm,
like, oh, wow, there's actually a bunch of things that they're doing for a rational reason that
yeah.
uh, may seem like problematic to us, but there's a reason for it. And
Yeah.
how do we then sort of redesign in a way that actually works for the collective?
Yeah.
But it's tough in this very polarized world,
Yeah.
trying to find data that you can all agree on, and also
Mm-hmm.
being willing to sort of step back and say, what if they're right? That's what I often
Yeah.
try and do.
So much of what you said really does resonate with the work we're doing with school boards. I think leading with data, I think there's a real appetite. And so we're glad to be able to provide that resource, right? I mean, they're all, it's a volunteer position, right? They're not paid. It's not a full-time job. They're asked to put in a lot of hours, and they really don't have access to the stuff. So to the degree to which we can produce that information and data for them, or reference to research, so that policy is research informed, that's great. I love what you said about the underlying conditions, because are we looking at the symptom, or are we trying to fix the cause? And I think that's a worthwhile conversation. Sticking with it, which is another, it's easy to,
Yeah,
I'm
being
tired of
resilient.
this one. Let me go
Yeah,
on to something else.
yeah, yeah,
But most important, being willing to take someone else's perspective and
yeah.
really try. People say that all the time, and I really do. I want to be good at it, but it's hard for us to sort of suspend. Let me just suspend everything that I think, and really try to see it from someone else's perspective, which is
It's
super
hard.
valuable.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that I'm amazing at it, but I definitely, as we get into complicated policy conundrums,
Hmm.
like figuring out the funding system,
Yep.
you know, uh, I was in a position of wanting to see pretty broad fundamental change, moving towards a weighted student funding model, and I
Hmm.
feel like there was some folks who are in the system today were like, that's really going to be destabilizing to shift too
Hmm.
fast. And as I really started to think about it, I was like, they're probably right. Like, we need to kind of take a step,
Hmm. Hmm.
and we need to get principals comfortable with having a significantly more
Hmm.
flexible funding system when they haven't had one before. Um,
Yep.
and they're also dealing with a federal landscape that's really unpredictable right now.
Hmm. Hmm.
So agreeing to, let's start a process that really kind of gets us on a path that's probably going to take several years to
Hmm.
iterate on, felt really important. But um, I know we talked a little bit about sort of what's working.
Hmm.
And,
Hmm.
for me, like there are some pretty important shifts that are happening right now. So happy to dive into that if that makes sense for you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a great one. Let's close on a up
Sure.
note here, right? There are
Sure.
success stories, so let's throw them out there.
Well, I feel like we are at this inflection point. You know, we all have been paying attention what's going on with the Reading Consortium, and I feel like that's been decades in the making. But we have a funding system that I believe we're going to see some significant legislation this June.
Mhm,
That's going to, for the first time in 80 years, really hopefully redirect, modernize that system.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
we know that literacy is a huge issue, and this governor and secretary of education are wholeheartedly committed there. There's been some good work legislatively up to this point. He's putting in tens of millions of dollars, and she has some serious expertise from San
for
Diego,
sure.
Secretary Martin, in implementation. So that
Yep.
combination of policy, funding, implementation, I
Mhm,
think we're going to see some significant movement. Um, We've had some good investments in the teaching force. There's some work
Mm-hmm.
at Brandywine School District, for example, on leadership that I'm really excited about. Like, how do you, as a teacher, former teacher, how do I see a path to exercise my own leadership capacity and elevate my compensation without leaving the classroom? And I think that's a really live conversation. So I'm excited about that. And I'd say the last one, on the pathways front, we started with 27 students in career pathways a decade or so ago. We now have 30,000. It's about 75%
Wow.
of all high school kids are involved. We've got over 8,000 middle school kids that are involved, and that's going to continue to grow. So we are seen as a national leader in that space. So I'm excited about how do we build on all of those pieces. But if we can, fundamentally, improve early childhood is another piece. There's been milestone investment of $50 million this year, and the governor's recommended. If we can move on early childhood, the funding system, literacy, pathways, our teacher workforce, that's a lot of movement in this very complex system. And, the implementation of it is going to be critical at the school board level. And so I think your role in connecting folks, educating people about what this looks like at the state level, and then how it informs local implementation is going to be critical.
Yeah. Well, thanks, and congratulations. I mean, it's starting to pay off. This is like, it really is an inflection moment where all of this hard work that has been poured in, and the dedication and the commitment and the stick to it witness, we're gonna get ready to see things really turn up. So, congratulations to you. Thank you for being on the show today. Shared so many wonderful things with the audience. The disdain for the norm is hands down the winner. Second runner up to that is disappoint your constituency at a rate that they can tolerate. I'm going to take those two. But Paul, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for all the work you do leading Rodel, what you've given to Delaware. And we do look forward to being a partner and supporting the implementation for this great stuff that you've framed out.
Thank you. Thanks, Julia. And great work. And just let us know how we can help. But
thanks.
Yeah, you've done a great job in getting this off the ground. So
thank you so much.
Opportunity.
No, for sure. And to our listeners, thanks so much for joining us. There's tons of resources on our Knowledge Hub around board leadership and for early education, as well as the funding formula. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.